Hello, and thank you so much for having me here at Gamescom Asia 2021. Today, we're going to be talking about moonshots or Agate's ambitions for our future and the growth of our local industry. My name is Igor, and I'm currently serving in the dual capacity of Chief Marketing Officer and Chief Creative Officer at Agate International. So I think I'd like to start with the question, why moonshot, and what exactly that means. I'd like to start with quoting a much more eloquent person than I. We chose to go to the moon and do the other things, not because they're easy, but because they're hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and our skills. John F. Kennedy said that in 1962 of the space race. At the time, he was using that speech to galvanize the entire country to go to the moon, literally. For us in Agate, that actually means something different. A moonshot for us serves as a unifying vision. It gives us a goal as a company and as a team to work towards, especially having gone through the pandemic year of 2020 as a team and having seen what we were able to do, what we were able to learn from it. We entered 2021 with a renewed vigor and a willingness to take a big leap forward. Just as Russia and the United States had done in the space race, we wanted to have a single target to work towards, but also to work towards it in a way that is manageable. And to work towards that goal, I guess, in a more cohesive and planned way. So let's start with a quick exercise. Our moonshot is basically our dream product as a company, right? Whatever that is. And so if you have one, let's imagine, if you will, your dream game. Now think about all the components that would go into making that dream game, whatever that is, and we'll put that into these little boxes on the screen. So let's say you want to build a third-person shooter. Maybe that's open world, maybe it's not. Maybe you'll want it to be procedure generated, maybe you want it to be multiplayer as well. As you start to add all these components, the game, your dream product, starts to balloon. That efforts can often starts to seem a little bit more difficult as all these features and all these little different elements that go into the game start to pile on. And at the end of the day, all of that has to be taken into context, the context that is going to be your team and your capabilities as a studio. So, for example, in this hypothetical case, your team might be very good at building combat systems and 3D models and customizable models already. But there are a few unknowns, there are a few challenges that you may not have a lot of experience in building, right? And that's the reality of game development. A lot of the things that we build on what we know, we build on what we know will challenge us, and we build on what we know we don't know. And the greatest risk of all comes from the things we just don't know. We approach it in this way because feasible and safe elements are things that you can plan for, things that you know your team has built over years. You know that these are things that these are technologies, systems, and or design principles that you've built from one game to another to the next. And then there are also manageable challenges, or things that, as over time, these are challenges that seem adjacent to the things you've done, or you know exactly who to ask in terms of help, and you know exactly what to build towards over time. But the biggest risk comes in the unknowns, the things that you know you don't know, and the things that you don't know that you don't know. And more often than not, this is where scope creep and risk and failure comes in. And so in planning for our moonshot, in planning for our dream product, we knew we wanted to dream big, but we also wanted to do it in a way that is responsible for the company and for our team. And so just as we've taken inspiration from the space race for the moonshot itself, we've also taken inspiration from how NASA had structured their efforts in going to the moon. They didn't build the Apollo 11 mission overnight, right? It wasn't planned in 1 week, and it wasn't built in a day. It took 7 years. That first quote by JFK was said in 1962, and Apollo 11 didn't reach the moon until 1969. And so how did that work? And the interesting part there is that they took it in stages, right? They took this massive undertaking that seemed so daunting and almost impossible at that point in time, and they decided to take it one step at a time, one problem at a time. And they went from the Mercury program to the Gemini, eventually building the Saturn rocket, and eventually the Apollo program. And so we can take those same principles that paved the way to go to the moon in game development and pave the way in terms of building our dream product. What we saw over our, I guess, 12 years of existing in the game industry is that a lot of the times, the biggest problems are the ones that we encounter mid-development. A lot of those unknowns that I talked about. And if you were to break down that massive goal and approach it from one product to another, those problems start to get smaller and smaller. And so if you were to think of that dream product in terms of 4 products that are smaller in scale, that build on one another, all of a sudden, the dream becomes more feasible, right? We should start with the first game. The first game should be easier, shall we say. It should focus on the core strengths of your team, then build upon the technologies and skill sets and expertise that you already know. Focus it on one single thing. If it's a survival game, focus it on survival mechanics. If it's a turn-based tactical RPG, focus it on the tactics, right? Once you have that core, in an ideal case, you're able to take that same concept, the same modules, the same systems, and the same team that you've used and work towards a bigger goal, right? Break down and tackle the next challenge for game 2. Game 3, at that point, you should have a few more systems built out. Maybe you've added weapon customization. Maybe you've added weapon crafting systems into your RPG, or if it's a tactical shooter, maybe you've added cover systems. Whatever that is, you've started to build modular building blocks from one game to another. And by the time you reach your 3rd game, your 4th game, you start to think of the big picture. You've started to look at problems that you can't solve internally at all. And then the solutions can potentially come from without, whether it's through acquisition or through partnerships or joint ventures. There's always a manageable and responsible way to problem solve if you take it one problem at a time. And eventually, the idea here is that with enough products and leading the way, you can finally be able to go to the moon, as we like to say. All that is to say that problems and risks can be managed, right? Take on challenges you can manage. You can't potentially deal with 10 different features that you don't know how to build on one game, but if you focus on one after another, all of a sudden that becomes a little bit more feasible. By breaking also your projects into smaller projects, you also reduce the amount of risk that you take on each project. And the best part of it is with each project, assuming you're able to keep your team and you're able to keep evolving your team, that team gets better with every product generation. Until finally, you're at a point where you're ready to go to the moon, and you're also able to look outward. Because the same concept that we use to build our dream product is actually usable elsewhere. You can use it to build entire industries. You can use it to build nations. And speaking from Agate's experience, in our experience the last 12 years, a lot of it has been spent building the industry first. So Agate was founded in 2009, not 2019. It's safe to say that at that time, the Indonesian game industry was a non-starter. It just didn't exist. And for the founders and for many of the would-be developers, there just wasn't a future in game development in Indonesia. And so for Agate, that meant there was an inherent need to build that in, whether it's teaching on a collegiate level, teaching teaching in students, teaching potential partners or enthusiasts. Eventually, over time, we've managed to build this ecosystem that had incubators and funding systems that could support an entire industry. And all of that is to say that 8 years ago, even as we were building the industry, the studio that we are today just didn't exist. 8 years ago, Agate was known for Flash games. 8 years ago, our core strength was in making fun, but 2D games. And while the gameplay was good, they were still very much old school. But it wasn't until 2017 that we really started to dream a bit bigger. 2017 saw the launch of, 2018, I was mistaken. 2018 saw the launch of Valthirian Arc, Here's Full Story, which is a sequel from one of our long-running titles, and Brave Arena. For us, that was a big leap, right? It represented a leap from 2D to 3D art. Brave Arena also gave us some very harsh lessons in attempting synchronous multiplayer, which many of you guys might know is a bit of a challenge every so often. But in making these games, we learned a lot. We knew how to tackle potentially the future problems of synchronous multiplayer. We started to get very good at building 3D assets, and we started to look towards other things. Maybe now we can focus on narrative processes, which led to 2019, where we launched Memories, a visual novel platform we launched locally in partnership with a few IPs to compete directly with the likes of Choices and Episodes. And it did very well locally because we had a clear goal there as well. We weren't interested in tackling the 3D art. We built on the existing systems of our 2D team, and we focused entirely on just building wonderful stories that we could tell over and over again. And then 2020, for a lot of us, that was a very interesting year. But for Agate, it was interesting not only because of the pandemic, but it was interesting because we launched two of our largest mid-core products, Esports King and Code Atma. With those two titles, we also learned a lot. Esports King presented a live ops and asynchronous PvP challenge, right? Managing that, seeing the balance over time was interesting to learn on the go. With Code Atma, we learned to refine those live ops processes that we've built on from Esports King, and started to focus on world building on a much grander scale. And so with that, having launched those titles in the last year, we went into 2021 with an itch that we really wanted to solve for synchronous multiplayer. Because for us, our Moonshot, I think, is in multiplayer. We wanted to get more people together. We wanted to build these collaborative spaces where people can play together, participate, but we can't do that until they can do it live. And so we were lucky enough to acquire, right? I mentioned earlier that the things that you can't solve internally, you can solve through partnerships, you can solve through acquisitions, and it's exactly what we did. We acquired the team from Pre-Emergency, having launched their own game, Retrograde Arena, which was a synchronous multiplayer game, and we welcomed them to the Agate family. And almost overnight, we had that capability. And now we're able to look towards the future. 6 games, an acquisition, and 12 years later, we're ready for that Moonshot. And so what does that mean? For Agate, that means breaking down the next 10 years. For Agate, that means looking at what we've done previously, what are our skill sets right now, and how can we plan for that future? But for Agate, that also means investing even further into the industry. The Agate Skylab Fund was one of those things that was really inspired by the possibilities of collaboration within the industry. And having worked with the team from Emergency personally, I'm so excited to see what that can hold for the local industry. Unfortunately, the Skylab Fund is currently only for limited to the Indonesian game industry, but we are looking forward to expanding it as we go. And so I'd like to end with one big piece of, I wouldn't say advice, but something to keep in mind. And that a lot of times when we look at game development or look at the evolution of game companies, we look at time. But really, teams, games, and companies can grow through products, right? I think it's best when, companies grow best when they look back on their products. When we look back on the last 3 years and the 6 products that we've built. Right? When we solve for one problem at a time, and not shying away from taking a big leap or two, and then maybe taking a step back and saying, maybe we want to take a smaller step first, or when we're ready, we'll go for that big jump. Because once you are able to take that and contextualize that, you'll find that the moon just isn't that far away. Oops. So thank you for listening. And I hope this would inspire you to dream a little bit bigger. Thank you and have a good day.